In the days when Israel was governed by judges, there lived a woman named Hannah. Her story takes place in a little town called Ramah, a place where hills stretched wide and where fields of wheat waved in the warm breeze. This is a story of resilience, faith, and the power of a heartfelt prayer. Hannah was married to a man named Elkanah, who loved her dearly. Elkanah was a good and righteous man, a man who followed the traditions of his ancestors. Every year, he would take his family on a pilgrimage to the holy city of Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that carried the tablets of the 10 Commandments, was kept. There, they would worship the Lord, offer sacrifices, and celebrate the blessings they had received. But for Hannah, these trips were not a time of joy. Hannah carried a sorrow deep within her. She was barren, unable to have children. While others would celebrate with laughter and feasts, Hannah would retreat to a quiet place, her heart heavy with grief. She longed for a child more than anything in the world. But year after year, her arms remained empty, her hope wavering. To make matters worse, Elkanah had another wife named Peninnah. Peninnah had been blessed with many children, and though she had all that Hannah desired, she was not content. Peninnah would taunt Hannah cruelly, mocking her for her childlessness. It was as if she derived joy from seeing Hannah's pain. "The Lord has given me children," she would say arrogantly, "while you remain barren. Perhaps you are not as favored by him." Despite these taunts, Hannah did not respond with anger. She bore her sorrow in silence, though her heart ached with every word, and each time they traveled to Shiloh, the pain would resurface, like an old wound that never fully healed. One year, after a particularly painful encounter with Peninnah, Hannah could bear it no longer. She left the feast table and went alone to the temple. Her soul was overwhelmed, her heart spilling over with emotion. She fell to her knees before the altar, her voice barely above a whisper as she began to pray. She poured out her anguish, her hopes, her dreams, and her pain, laying them all before God. "O Lord Almighty," she prayed, tears streaming down her cheeks, "if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, if you will give your servant a son, then I will give him to you for all the days of his life. No razor will ever touch his head." In that moment, she made a vow. If God granted her the child she so desperately wanted, she would dedicate that child to the Lord, setting him apart as a Nazirite, consecrated for service to God. As Hannah prayed, her lips moved silently, for her voice was lost in her deep anguish. Eli, the high priest, nearby and observed her. He saw her lips moving but heard no sound. Mistaking her sorrow for drunkenness, he approached her. "How long will you keep on drinking?" he asked sternly. "Put away your wine." Hannah, startled, looked up at Eli with tear-filled eyes. "Not so, my lord," she replied gently. "I am a woman deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer, I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman, I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli's face softened as he listened to her words, seeing the depth of her faith. He realized he had misjudged her. "Go in peace," he said kindly, "and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." Hannah rose, her heart lighter, her spirit filled with a quiet hope. She returned to her family and joined in the feast, her sorrow momentarily lifted. In her heart she clung to Eli's blessing and the possibility that God might hear her prayer. In time the Lord remembered Hannah. She conceived and bore a son. Overjoyed, she named him Samuel, which means heard by God, for she had cried out to God, and he had heard her. As Samuel grew, Hannah cherished every moment with her child, knowing that she would one day fulfill the vow she had made. Though it pained her to think of parting with him, her devotion to God was unwavering. When Samuel was weaned, she prepared to take him to the temple in Shiloh, just as she had promised. When she arrived at the temple, she found Eli, the same priest who had blessed her. She approached him, holding young Samuel's hand. "Pardon me, my lord," she said, "as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life, he will be dedicated to the Lord." Eli looked down at the young boy, realizing that this was the answer to Hannah's anguished prayer. He accepted Samuel, who would now be raised in the temple, serving God from a young age. Hannah's heart ached as she said goodbye to her son. but her spirit was filled with peace. She had kept her vow, trusting that God's purpose for Samuel's life would be greater than her own dreams for him. As Hannah walked away, she felt a strange joy and sang a song of praise. Her heart was full, for she had seen God's faithfulness firsthand. Her song echoed through the temple courts, a song of gratitude and worship. "My heart rejoices in the Lord." She sang, "In the Lord, my horn is lifted high. The Lord brings death and makes alive, he brings down to the grave and raises up. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor." Though her arms were now empty once more, Hannah knew she was blessed beyond measure. She had given her son to the Lord, and in return, she had received the peace and joy of knowing that God's plan was greater than her own. Years passed, and every year, Hannah and Elkanah would return to Shiloh to offer their sacrifices and to visit Samuel. Each time, Hannah would bring a small robe for Samuel, one she had given herself. She watched him grow, saw him become wise and strong, and each time, she marveled at God's hand upon his life. God, in his kindness, blessed Hannah again. She bore 3 more sons and 2 daughters, a family that filled her life with love and laughter. But Samuel held a special place in her heart, for he was the child of promise, the child who had been given by God and returned to him in faith. Samuel grew up in the temple under Eli's care, and as he matured, he became known as a man of great faith and integrity. In time, he would become one of Israel's greatest prophets, a leader who would guide the people back to God, anointing both Saul and David as kings. Hannah's legacy lived on through Samuel's life. Her faith, her prayer, and her willingness to trust in God's plan had brought forth a man who would shape the destiny of a nation. Through her story, the people of Israel learned that God hears the cries of the brokenhearted, that he is faithful to those who trust him, and that even the most desperate prayers can bring forth the most miraculous answers. The story of Hannah became a source of hope for countless others who, like her, waited on God with empty arms, wondering if their prayers would ever be answered. Her life showed that God's timing is perfect, that his promises are sure, and that those who trust in him will never be disappointed. And so, the memory of Hannah's faith lives on, a beacon for all who seek the Lord with a heart full of hope and a spirit willing to surrender. For in her story, we see that God hears, God remembers, and God redeems. Trust God's ways and let him direct yours. Keep watching. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.